All right. So good morning. We're going to start with Lamrim Kappa Guru Yoga. Then Geshe will lead the way with refuge in bodhicitta as a way of correcting our motivation. And then something else would probably happen. Stay tuned. On the heart of the savior of the 100 deities of the Shita, on the peak of cloud resembling a clump of extremely white fresh curd, King of Dhamma, Omniscient Lawson Brahma, please come here together with your sons. In the sky before me on the lion throne, lotus and moon, my perfect, pure Guru smiles with delight. Supreme field of merit from a mind of faith, please abide for 100 eons to spread the teachings. Your holy mind is the intelligence that understands the full extent of objects to be known. Your holy speech with its explanation is an ear ornament of those of good fortune. Your holy body is radiantly beautiful with glory renowned. To you are meaningful to see, hear and remember are prostrate. Pleasant drinking water, various flowers, fragrant incenses, lights, scented waters, and so forth. Oceans of cloud-like offerings, both actually arranged and mentally emanated. I offer to you the supreme field of merit. Whatever non-virtue of body, speech, and mind, especially those opposite to the three vows that I have collected from beginningless time, I confess each and every one with fervent regret from my heart. You strove for much learning and practice in this degenerate age and made your freedoms and richnesses meaningful by abandoning the 8 worldly concerns. Savior, we sincerely rejoice in your extensive deeds. Perfect pure holy gurus from the billowing clouds of wisdom and compassion in the sky of the Dhammakaya, please let fall a rain of profound and extensive Dhamma upon the receptacle of those to be subdued exactly as they need. May whatever virtue I have collected benefit the teachings and all transmigratory beings, and in particular may it cause the essence of perfect, pure loss and Drakma's teachings to shine forever. Sa shi po ki jun chi me to Ram ri ram ling shi ni de gen pa di sang ye shi hindu mi te o wa i jo ku nam da shin la cho fa sho. By the merits of having offered this mandala to Lama Tsongkhapa and his 2 sons, may I, my family members, and all sentient beings be able to meet, practice, and actualize the teachings of the victorious one, Lawson Drakma, what is the morality of an eminently pure way of life, and was courageous and extensive conduct of the sons of the victorious ones, and accomplish the yoga of 2 stages of supreme bliss and emptiness. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamniyatayami. By the force of having fervently requested in this way, all of beings of white light are emitted from the hearts of the perfect pure Father and Sons, and combining into one enter my crown. White nectar, the color of milk, flows from the opening of tube of white light, cleansing all my sicknesses, spirit harms, negative karmas and inspirations, and the imprints without exception. My body becomes as pure and clear as crystal. So we're going to go down to page 13 and recite the Mixima verse 3 times. Mi metse wete chen chen rezi, jime
Jimmy
kembe
Kimbe Wambo
wambo jampe
Jambe
yang, dubu
Dubu
malu
Malun
jomze
Jomze
sangwe
Samweta
da, kanche
Kanchi
kembe
Kimbe
tsugen
Tsugin
tsonga pa,
Tsungapa
losandra
Losandra
pe shabla
Peshabla
sowa de.
Soade
Mi metse
Mimetse
wete
Vete
chen
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 rezi,
Rezi
jime kembe wambo jampe yang,
Dubu
dubu malu
Malun
jomze
Jomze
sangwe
Samweta
kanche
Kanchi
kembe
Kimbe
tsugen
Tsugin
tsonga pa,
Tsungapa
losandra
Losandra
pe shabla
Peshabla
sowa
So
de. Mi metse
Mimetse
wete
Vete
chen
Chen Chen
chen rezi,
Rezi
jime
Jimmy
kembe
Kimbe
wambo
Wambo
jampe
Jambe
Dubu
Dubu
malu
Malun
jomze
Jomze Samweta
sanwe da kanche
Kanchi
kebe
Kimbe
tsugen
Tsugin
songa pa
Tsungapa
lo
Losandra
sandra pe shavla
Peshabla
soa
Soade
de.
Sangye Chodang
Chondan tsogi
Tsojun
chonam
Chonung
la
La
chanchu
Chanchu
badu
Bardu
dani
Dani
kyasu
Kyabsun
chi dagi
Dagi
chi
Chushi
shegi be
Jibin
tsonangi
Chonungi
rola
Dolan Ben
penchi
Sanjin
sangye do
Drupara
parasho.
Sho Sangye
Chondan
Chodang
tsogi
Tsojun Chonung
chonam la
La
chanchu
Chanchu
badu
Bardu
dani
Dani
kyasu
Kyabsun
chi
Dagi
dagi chi
Chushi
shegi be
Jibin
tsonangi
Chonungi
rola
Dolan Ben
penchi
Sanjin
sangye do
Drupara
parasho.
Sho Sangye
Chodan
Chedan
tsogi
Sojin
chonam
Chonung
la
La
chanchu
Chanchu
badu
Bardu
dani
Dani
kyasu
Kyabsun
dagi
Dagi
chi
Chushi
sheki be
Jibin
tsonangi
Sonungi
rola
Dwalan Ben
penchi
Sanjin
sangye do
Ruparan
parasho.
Sho Kangi Tuzini Zone Dawa Tamje Pambi Chere Tambi Chun Denzi Kodam Kela Changse Lo Good morning everyone. Asada Anta Lamram Gun Sam Teni Share Chiglaya Titiri on the Tsaw Chimbuda the mini news model leg mare Samsara then chance paper to the Lamram on the Tani the Lamram Chik Nyango sound paper in the and mixing some years.
We have been studying Lama Tsongkhapa's presentation, middling presentation on the states of the path of enlightenment, and we're going to continue from the point that we left off in the previous session. So on the Friday morning teachings, we've been looking at these texts for a while, and today is a hot day, so Geshe kind of thought that probably we're not going to have many people coming here today, but you proved him wrong, and Geshe is happy to be proven wrong. So thank you very much. Greeting for everyone who came today.
There is the Danganzu Lamram the Nyaya Chibu Mayambara. Nyamba Samjiki Pentok Mevata Jasjatamares. The Lanel Tariach. The Lanel down the Kayo Layo Lanel Tariati. On the good jam to Semjian the Jamdo. Javi Kunjosum Sweat Saltab. Teni the Kunjosum Laya Javsun Jondi. And it's Megichubong Sudamlaya Julia di Kichishure Dasra, Kichishure di Katu Chituki Megichubong with Sudam Soya di Niman Himalaya called and Kayala di Chebana and Lamram Digi Yajatamba Pendoyon. The Mena and Lamram Yen Penya Kaburoch Kaburojes.
So then in listening to the teachings on the steps of the path of enlightenment, if we just going to listen, just and not do anything with them, the benefit that we'll get from that would be rather limited. One might wonder, is there much benefit in only listening to the teachings? If we not only listen to the teachings, but also put them into practice, from that, we'll get the benefit from this teaching. So we begin this practice first of all through the gateway of going for refuge. So we then supplicate the three objects of refuge, or we visualize these objects of refuge, we go for refuge. And the most important thing, having gone for refuge, is to take up the practice of ethical discipline that abstains from the 10 non-virtues. And this is what we do daily in a practice. We practice ethics, which abstains from the 10 non-virtuous actions. And from that, we receive the benefit of the practice. Without guiding ethics which abstains from these 10 non-virtues, it'd be hard to think that there would be benefit that we will get from a practice.
tirdanganzu sanjilaya teba chedi ani sanjigi song ti da laglen tarya chedu sanjilaya teba chigoras chöla teba chedi chökunjo bigi da rangulay kiwa chedu chöla teba chigoras gendunlaya teba chewati ani chö dribigi dadrog chedu da gendunlaya tengyoras ro tinza ani nganzu kuba che gwasa di kubachi gwasa dilaya kubachi mashibayna teni the chu chenlab sadi jugya pe khabarashas ta kubachi gwasa di kyawi kunjo sumre sanji chu kendun sundri ta nganzo sanji ngusun jigyo mari chu di golam pi ta ji en zu sem gudra dan ji za tiang nganzo le ko kyo ba do chaon ta khayo la yo ki chi en gendun set ro gendun de di nganzo ta ngonsum di 제투고레스 아니 겐딩 데레 겐딩 데요 사기 즉 아니 사지 순전히 아니 대강 순전히 아니 디 그버치사 율레야 샤토바나 아니 캬위레야 그발레 투레스 데발레 투레스 디 또기 아니 산지 찬성기 챤럽디 랑귤레야 주야치 디용고레스 디즈 디 인지미지 아 강한도 쇼지 에네 데발레야 gendung techi uyo mare ine ta saja delaya gendung ba nyongshi zuma nyongshi gendung ba nyongshi yore dutsu dutsu ngunzi chetu goya di pe kichimbo resha sirwa.
So, as we said, the gateway for our practice is going for refuge. We go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. So we develop faith in the Buddha, for the Buddha is the one who taught us how to practice. So from the point of view of teaching the practices, we develop faith in the Buddha. We develop faith in the Dhamma, true paths and true cessations, which outline the stages of developing our mind. And we also take refuge in the Sangha, which is the assistance or companionship that we keep that demonstrate to us the way that we put the Buddha's teachings into practice. So then, when we go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, we do that with a sense of respect. Without that sense of respect to these objects of refuge, it would be hard to really engage the teachings of the Buddha in a practice. So as we go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, we develop faith in the Buddha and such, then, well, first off, we haven't met the Buddha in person, in that the Buddha lived and passed away so many centuries ago. So we haven't met the Buddha in person. Now, as for the Dhamma, true paths and true cessations, which are the actual Dhamma jewel to be given rise to in the mind stream, it's really difficult to see what it is. As such, true paths and true cessations for us are hidden phenomena. But what we can see, evidently, is the third object of refuge, which is the Sangha. So we see the Sangha, we meet the Sangha, we have this group of monastics, monks and nuns, which we meet in person. So at least in terms of developing a sense of veneration or respect, then we can put that into practice with those that we meet. And through that sense of respect, that also then leads to a sense of faith in them. We receive the blessings of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So, for example, here, at least at this center, we don't have a big community of Sangha members. So we have a few monks and a few nuns. So at least when we recognize the role in terms of the refuge that we take in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and through that we then apply to a practice in developing a sense of respect and so forth, then we can recognize at least the role that they play in a refuge. And this is a really important point to make.
어디에 디자다 데게 삼성이야 지 소소소게 레든 디 ngazu genki go das penata nga daw jimba na ani lama sobor mu chi kenan de kyu ni pigile ya anchi lotri cheshos somba inza danga de lebaros ze tanda par dungi gi ta chi pigile ya digme ba ina ya o kaptu le ya ta digme dos ke lagmes ro ne la phok do re samsam ro chi to do samdang di ta malam na ngarang ngarang gen do di ke ma do samsam ro samsam and did it so dos and chi mom bichala ya nga chi gomban sena mundu ani chozo di nalo la ya chi chi yore da chosho ton samdang di zaw ni munti ga chi thong ba na and did mundu se lab go sare samsam ro chi did it sona jile sons ro 지기지나 계란 계좌 먹는다서 계란을 좀 먹고 살아와는 갈 케바스키요 말아서 나랑 genki di digital go sare samsung yang anzu chi ani rama changlang soro chiro ta chigina singyo mar rodan singyo mare ani kushib chedan singyo mare kayo mar chigina ani di kande rojina ro ani devel leon di chozo dina leon di chi kar cheche soro chi re sambane di tsawni ni samare di chena dik samare ro
Kanchechisu samgara di
so
konsu.
so so raman kandan
So then at times Geshe looks at the things that he does here at Shimrazi Institute, and at times there's a certain significance or meaning to some of the things that we do. In a sense that first of Geshe was appointed here quite a few years ago as to be the Tibetan teacher here at the center. It was appointed by Kyabje Lama Sopa Rinpoche. So then we have here, we have a community, we have a center, and at times when things are not going okay, or when there are certain things that are done that Geshe doesn't feel that that's the way that they should be done, Geshe feels that sometimes that if he says something about it, someone might take offense or might get hurt and so forth. So sometimes Geshe just refrains from saying anything. But then looking at it, thinking about it from another perspective, Geshe feels that actually this is his responsibility sometimes to point out things which are not done properly. This is his role as the teacher that was appointed here to this center by Kapjan Lama Sopa Rinpoche. So then thinking of the future, being a Dhamma center, being, you can say, a Gompa or a monastery, a Dhamma center, if Geshe feels that there are some things that are not being done in a proper way, in the right way, well, Geshe feels that kind of is also part of his responsibility to point it out. So, of course, it could be the case that someone says that, well, this is not your business. This is not your place to say anything about it. So please keep your mouth shut. It is possible that someone might say that, but Geshe feels that, of course, when we work with each other, there's some areas which we don't necessarily know how to do certain things. We don't know what's the right way of doing that thing. Sometimes we don't know what's the right way of showing a token of respect and so forth. So Geshe says that at least from his perspective, kind of he contributes to that and point out some of those areas. And he feels that part of his responsibilities.
terda dene matang az khazin samdi direshas dongar kochi dongar sambatleya ani ni chene dongar ge sambata dongar truk samba ta ge sambat dosar da tan dongar truk sambati ani gombulu ki shooting ma dani songdos ro dene ma chi sro chis.
Anyway, having said that, we're going to go back to the text and pick up on the point that we left off in the previous session. So we have been looking at Lama Tsongkhapa's middling presentation of the stairs of the path of enlightenment. And currently we're looking at the stairs of the path which are shared with those of medium capacity. Now, we have been covering the section that explains how to meditate on suffering. And the meditation on suffering has two parts. One of them is considering the 8 types of suffering. So we've finished that in the previous session. Today, we're going to pick up from the second type of meditation of suffering, which is contemplating or considering the 6 steps of suffering. Now, Lama Tsongkhapa in this text begins with his explanation with drawing from Nagarjuna's letter to a friend.
Terita dunga truk dima randan ro di shooting les ngeba meba ngom meshiba lu yang dan du torwa yang dan du nimsun churwa yang dan du tome du kyowa tro maybe ngeba truk sombanis.
So, drawing from Nagarjuna's letter to a friend, it states that the 6 faults of cyclic existence are: first one, lacking certainty, then lacking satisfaction, having to discard one's body again and again, being reborn again and again, changing from high to low again and again, and lacking companions.
Retan di karsun gore dodo zo karsun gore slaundi ani ta dunghar sungore ta dunghar yongsa di zawa di chagdam mosum di dunga yongsa di chagores tinza ta chagdang nimbo di kandash tengores chagbi nimbo kandash tengores laundi chagpa singi di lo di yulpi yulchilpa ani chok sulhongchini pena ngezong ko soro ta dengi lojing banza di ngezong ta de di ngezong mayimba de ngomalaya ngoyo netsulaya ta ngeba meba ta ngom mishiba ta yani do toyela so di sondi chakbi nimbo sungores ra.
So when Nagarjuna points out these 6 faults of cyclic existence, you might wonder, or 6 faults of suffering, you might wonder, what is he actually saying in short? In brief, what he's saying is pointing out the origins of suffering. The root of suffering is anger, attachment, and ignorance. This is the source of suffering, samsaric suffering. So how then do we antidote anger, attachment, and ignorance? Well, to begin with, attachment is a sense of partiality towards an object, in that the object of attachment has a certain measure of existence, and attachment is a distorted way, or as you can say, a superimposition of the reality of that object. So here, when Nagarjuna points out those faults of cyclic existence, he points them up in relation to the antidote to attachment. So he says that there are faults in samsara, such as lacking certainty, lacking satisfaction, having to discard bodies again and again, being reborn again and again, changing from high to low again and again, and lacking companions.
Adir da di ta truk di tsu sum tsu duni da tab dehuchin da sondi ani korwala yikden chasa yo mares ngiba meba set korwala yikden chasa yo ma ta korwa di manzo tsin dan hangi ta pena jigro an tsin di gi ta jig lu tsebe ani gyopen jolo soba ani nyen de lo soba o digidile ya ta ani korwena dozo digores ta dozo yikden chasa yo mares la ondi da ani yikden pigil ta lamrim nala digidile ya yikden chasa yo mares so da nganju semna la ta chik tembu shu zang du mandu kezin zang me bayna digorta zang yo bayna ani lamrim nala la ya yikden che yo mares susu semna la ya tembu shu zin de tingi mu da tan gandu chason da disu dembar rendu su dembar remundu tingu yo netsula ya samlo tani rara tango ya chi o dinri songoras ra.
And these 6 faults of cyclic existence are again summarized into 3 points. The first one is that there is nothing reliable in cyclic existence. There's nothing that we can rely upon in cyclic existence. So looking at the affairs of this life, appearances of this life, such as, for example, a body, our possessions, or wealth, our friends, all of them belong to samsara, and none of them is something that we can rely upon. So then when we look at our attitude in our mind, a mental attitude with respect to our body, our possessions, our friends, and so forth, if we have no apprehension of them as being those things which are stable that we can rely upon, that's okay. But then if we look at a mind and find that actually a mental attitude is indeed apprehending them as being stable, as being something that rely upon them, then this is something that we need to assess. We need to check it out. Are they really kind of, if we have that apprehension, it's all those things being reliable, something that are things which are stable, are they really stable, or are they things that we cannot rely upon with that sense of stability? So when we look into it, then there's something that we gain from that contemplation.
데르다 딘자 벤당안주 디치기요 말았어. 마도 비게 사제리리야 베난 코와라 이든 샤서 요 말이세티. 식 디톤에 상무다네. 아니 비게 유 코와 문젠치 대남 이든 요다 메그톨이야 상무다네로 민남 꺄네. 베나 아 베나 dunta치기린다고지야. 디코 톨이야. 아니 민남 꺄네. 아니 로 때바이나 야차 야담바 셈 땡니 pe 아니 소 예비톤다 니바니에지 융구여서레 당가 디치기요 말았으라 아주 디리치시 아니 사니 디샤 셴바시도 로자디 아주 셈 나나야지 하야로 지 메교디 몽구 깨우 담바 소 옌바이나 아니 뇽틱싱 람름 뇽틱싱 치고레스 람름 뇽틱 치고 카둘라야 피길라야 ngoten 아니 민남 꺄추 라 이마지리야 튼시 꺄고는데 툭 꺄고는데 가리네 꺄주는 되는 뭐 돈타 뜨진 오늘 샘라야 요스 때온디 되는 사지 오마들런도 두스체 당한줄라 두즈요 말이 아니 다이 용구요 말스 마도 치다 두시고 거서레스 라 두시바이나 아니 야시야다 뭐 샘라야 요태야지 디마 당한줄 샘라 요태야디 카부 쇼레도 서라 마당한도 베마스 카부레셔스.
So this is something that we often do not really do. We do not really let those teachings affect our mind. But then when we check out what this text is saying in relation to every state, you can say, within cyclic existence, we can really see that there is no certainty within cyclic existence. So first of all, in order to assess that, we need to recognize samsara. We need to be able to identify what it is. And then we take it on into a meditation in focusing on states within cyclic existence and developing in our mind the aspects of those meditations, right? So we, in a meditation, we integrate focal objects and the aspects that we developed in our mind in order to then, as we, for example, contemplate the uncertainty of samsaric states, we can, if we do that over 1 week, we can definitely 100% recognize it as a heartfelt sensation that there is no certainty within cyclic existence. It can come from the bottom of our heart. So if we don't really let it affect our mind, if we change between different topics that we take up, one day we say one point and the following day we say another point, or we look at another point, if we do not let that affect our mind, there's not much of mental transformation that can occur. So there is a form of teachings which are given by lamas, which are called experiential transmission or experiential guidance, in which a lama or a teacher will teach 1 point 1 day, then they would say, tomorrow you need to meditate on today, or tomorrow you need to meditate on those points in a traditional way. You might sustain it in meditation, in which you focus on certain focal objects, you develop aspects in meditation. You do it over a day or two, over 1 week, 4 sessions a day, until your mind is transformed. There is some form of mental transformation that occurs, and then the Lama will then move on to the next point. So this form of teaching, for example, the stages of the path of enlightenment, is called an experiential guidance. But here, looking at the structure of a spiritual program, we don't really have the ability to do it here in this way. So we, for example, in those weekly teachings that we have, um, we cover a text and we move from one point to the next. We don't have really the time that allows us to go through that experiential transmission or experiential guidance. So it's hard then for mental transformation to occur, isn't it? At least Geshe said that on a personal level, he finds that um, it's also difficult for his mind to be this kind of very transformable for a thorough transformation to occur in this fashion.
어디리다 라다 베난 코가 코비 베나 다치 차라지 베나 당한주 아니 류롱주니 요래 다 롱주 차라야 섬담에나 아니 람람 나나 다 롱주라 님부여 말레스 니데여 말레스 라 먼저 팬도질이야 문제치니 저거다 베나 벤저도지니야 팬도질이야 문제치니 지원디게 팬토비 네바 써니니 메바디 먼저 마 데는 성우야고 땅와나 네번 니토야지로스 이내 가서 뒤치 말았어 이 맞이야 맞지 지금 메시 간살이야 안 디코랑 톨이야 아니 셈테 아 로심비칼이나 아니 벤저트야 톨 상원당 로존치 다르칼이나 벤저트 벤저코나 다 겐고 차원디나야 다 수순 저런 거다 던더이나야 아니 지 디케치무 쇼진 진치니 아니 디코랑 알아대니 로데죠. 다두 시온디 다 산이 니마질이야 쿨리온디 만줄리온디 되네 이탄치 아니 마키버차 로팜부시 증안에 아니 시고에 차와나 아니 깨워치마 강수생이들 깨로버렸어.
So we think of a samsaric state, like for example, we think of in a practice of samsara and the things that belong to cyclic existence, like a body and possessions, as being part of samsara. Our enjoyments or resources are parts of samsara. And here this teaching said that there's no certainty in our body and possessions. There is no stability in them. So think about, for example, our possessions, our resources, our wealth. Even if we have some, it is not certain that it will actually help us, that it will be of benefit to us. And even though there is no guarantee or certainty that that our possessions or resources will indeed be of benefit to us, we don't think about it. We can find certainty in that if we think about it, but we actually don't really think about it. We don't think about it, and in our life, when we look at the way that the attitude that we develop towards wealth or money, resources, and so forth, when we are young, then we have those plans and ideas of how we're going to make ourselves rich, or how we're going to get money, possessions, and so forth. That happened when we were younger. Then we have our current attitude with respect to money or wealth, which again is thinking that this is something that I need to have, this is something that I need to assemble, to amass, and so forth. And even when we get old, we still think about it. We still, even at a old age, we think, how can I get more? So we live a life in this way, and one day, when it happens that in being consumed throughout the life with those issues, we become a bit weary, without the money, is becoming unhappy. And when we draw towards the end of our life, and then we go through the process in which we transition to our next life, then all that engagement with trying to get money, trying to get possessions, becoming weary in that process, becoming happy and unhappy, and so forth, we find that this leads us to miserable states of existence in future lifetimes.
데리다 어레 디니 답비기 다 이데메번 통니 지 가서다 아 로밤 마종바네야 착셈기 로 착셈 슈지왕기 시갈라모들이야 텔레차니 pe ani ukche matue dia yungor tinji leni ani shigu chongba na ya chigbarita ngansong le kia nyanga pe chimbores ra dinza da tu sama nganzu le tambo la kendi ani lonju toni chegores ra yigde mebi lonju toni da nganzu ye kendi hiti chegoyanza di tandan samlo tane chik kola ya yigde meba chik tatu ba na yache gyatamba ani nima chik tatu ba na di tsogi an semla ya pasha kyawachi shaya da chuchu chigri samlo tane ba di tsogi semla pasha shaya tende kyawa yungu yosares ro.
So then we think of the lack of stability, the lack of stability or certainty in our life. And when we let attachment, for example, affect our life throughout our life, if attachment is that which is present throughout our life and also being on the verge of death, we can get to the point in which, with that sense of attachment, we can't even breathe. So if that what happens kind of throughout the life, we sustain the sense of attachment, which is also present being on the verge of death, it makes it very difficult for us even to take a breath. Then again, that could be something that leads us to a miserable state of existence in our next lifetime. This is a dangerous situation. So that what we can do with that is to, first of all, study the nature of cyclic existence. We discover or we recognize that lack of certainty, that lack of guarantee with respect to possessions and such. And we also give it some consideration. And through that consideration of the unreliable nature of our existence, we come to recognize the actual nature of those things. So if we do it even just for one day, if we do it even just for 1 hour, we at least place imprints upon the mental continuum for the recognition of the lack of certainty of samsara.
re ganjin ta dinangol ya ta yigde me banza tsela yigde me banza anzu kewa chimala rogo gores ta di kewa chimala ya rogo kala ya sem di galamang ji tone rotu wa na kewa chima me da dendro la ya ki gores rabena ngandelle ni matambu delle di ane gengos dos ane ma re ani moran ro na pe ani yabuchin rosons yacha gyatamba pe ani same thing bi ta chi same thing le ya chi ani chug chinlab yoyo ro chi pe ya bu dos ra an dia ko chi ta chinju ko ne nganzo na shi chinju ko ne rab chon ko go ra yo mar ta ya len lo ta ni sum chi shi chu ab ju ka le ya ta shi ni ta ani zum ma chi war was te di je la ya anda ani le shemba chi yos mora lo chi sma da ta ani chin de mar le ne ya 사만남다 지원이 다만 좋은데 지금 뭐라 그래도 중에 무슨 통스 뭐라 변조도 지 피기래야 아마 기회신이나 피고서도 피 저절라 피고야 피 지금 뭐라 보면 그래도 야차 야다 뭐 로샤샤 뭐 대부 돈으로 지원이 다디 야시 야다 기회시 말라 팽그레스 텐지지 그렇도 봐나 당한 좀 드론 거래 아니 지 소소 남라 쇼지 tigladingi me na maki ba shoji odu sen rogo chono an tabkyur wasra di dindrich mogo ya tandan sam dang go ya di pe masu kechi mo rema dang an chi zawi gi da se rimbu dego gire an chi choden ya bu yore sayan ton ya bu re lomba ki ure rede ne kazu rimbu de ba na lo kya las ma do de maras di this samla shago ya di kanji lamram nyen ngone lamram sem din nyena tuzu semle shagwadi pe mazu kishimu chik chagores.
So this point emphasizes the lack of certainty, the lack of stability, nothing that we can rely upon in samsara. So a life, we cannot rely upon our life in a sense that we continue upon a death, we will go from this lifetime to the next. So if we take certain, if we take certain steps, we can proceed to next life with a happy state of mind, with a happy or joyous state of mind. And if we die with that happy and joyous state of mind, it will lead us to a pleasant state of existence in the next lifetime, in a comfortable state of existence. Like, for example, having lived here for a few years and having met some people in our community, when Geshe came here, we had one of the senior nuns in our center that has been here for many years, Annie Mag, and she passed away in having lived as a nun for more than 40 years. So she hasn't been a nun since since her, you can say, teenage years, So she became a nun when she was 20 or 30, in her 20s or 30s. But anyway, um, when we look at her transition from this lifetime to the next, Geshe feels that she had like a really good death, in a sense that the state of mind was in a good state, and certainly you can say that this is the blessings of the Dharma. We had another member of our community, Annie Johnson, um, that was a nun for about a year, and she got also sick with a terminal condition. She passed away after a year. And sometime before she passed away, she distributed all her possessions, money, and so forth. She gave some to her daughter. She left some of the possession and money to her daughter, some to her teachers, to Dharma centers, and so forth. So that when she passed away, at the end, she passed away and having given away all her things and money, so that she was able to pass away to die with a good state of mind. And Geshe feels that kind of that we look at someone that is dying with that kind of peaceful or good state of mind, you can see that this is something that is really helpful. Otherwise, when we think of other ways of transitioning from this lifetime to the next, proceeding with a sense of fear, with a sense of anxiety, with a sense of unhappiness and so forth, this is a really poor way of passing away. So it's really important to think about it now. It's important to think about it, and particularly in this place. So we're living in a place in which we enjoy good health. It is more possible that we will live longer, right? So we enjoy good health. We have good food. We live in a place in this country which affords really good conditions. So we might live long. We might live to be even at most, you can say, for 100 years, which actually is not a big number. It's not a great lifespan at the end. So even if you live a long life for 100 years, at the end, your life will come to an end. So it's important then to make sure that at the time that you still have left in your life, that you apply your mind to the stairs of development in a way that accords, for example, with this presentation of the stairs of the path, the Lamrim. This is really important.
Teri dinzada ngi konzu pension kaji shagwarsinda ta tuzu tundonji mado shu roya maras paranzu roya mezi kansala ya chik chue nyamle chin de tuzu chong yo marde ina ya tuzu tundonji nangla ya samlo nembu chin tangba inza gyuwa roya chik gyuwa tang tugo ras ro dinza ta ngan zola ya ta penda chik ane susu ta kimdab song yo nge bugu futu yo nge ta lega lo drogo nge dinti ta manche ras tuzu yo maras taro ta tuzu yo maras lagora ta tuzu yo mar yin ba ina ya tuzu tes tamba di bigila ya chik nembu chin sam tamba ina chuzu chik sam tanga nanda ro ima chik sam tanga nanda tamba rila ya nembu chin sam tamba ina di gi ani semla ya shugin shu tego sares ro
Ani mang peshe lo ngapchu san debre.
ala
Ani mang, ani peshe lo shipchu ngapchu ani debre. Tuzu tuntung hari.
chidang ganzo che
Anyway, I guess I'll give just a couple of examples of a couple of members of our community who did not, you could say, they might not have got a long time to practice, just a short time or a shorter time. So even though they haven't had like a lot of time to practice, still within a short span of time, they were able to affect a great transformation in the mind. So these examples were examples of a couple of monastics, but then not everyone has those conditions that monastics have for practice. So you might be a lay person, you might have other responsibilities, work, family, and so forth that you need to attend to, which means that it is very possible that the time that you can spend in your spiritual practice is going to be even shorter. But still, even if it is shorter, you can still find ways in order to use your time to bring about this. You spend your time in serious contemplation of a very powerful, effective contemplation that can bring about transformation. So you might have shorter time, but if you really think about it deeply, if you think about it for one day, one time, one day, if you think about it for 1 hour, you can still give your mind certain power. You can still find that momentum and the mental level that will bring about a sense of transformation.
그래서 디 대화라 디 대화라 단 코비 대화라에 치점 제장 곰비기 탐에 받아서 쓰리다 곰이야기 따라 코비 다 직변나 변나 가서 다지 동약이 되지 바이나 그러다 디기 변은 타만년다서 되지 바이나 디 내가 비 샘라야 초와 대화지다 용거라 다 용거 이나 디 가주스 곰고도 들어 곰이야 찌요 말다 변은 디로지라고 그랬다 곰비 탐에 받아서 다 곰비 탐에 봐마세 아니 타마들이야 안직 수수기 아니 수분이 지네 아니 촐라다야지 그러 딩거를 다 디낭신기 다지 디낭신기 비글이야 샘그토니 아니 데버마서니 아니 차섬 치르도바이나 아니 샘디야 오늘 샘디지 야기르 요디야 아니 촐라다 간지 류섬 이걸로 아니 몽엄바 디게 촐라다샤지 윤거를 됐어.
Or, for example, not being able to find satisfaction with samsaric pleasures. For us, with respect to samsaric pleasures, we become insatiable with respect to them. We find no satisfaction in whatever we can get in samsara. And we can look at different examples, even though some of the example might be quite simple, like, for example, taking up drinking or smoking. Do we really find that satisfaction, long-term satisfaction, in drinking, smoking, and so forth? Not only they do not bring about that sense of satisfaction, also you can say that at the end they damage our body. So likewise, when we think of the lack of satisfaction that we find in our mind, we have a lot of desires, we have attachment that grows stronger and stronger without being able to find satisfaction, and that also damages our mind. In short, that lack of satisfaction is something that harms our body and mind.
다 토모미원 슈퍼레스톤 다디 직송거들에 대화를 제점 제장 곰비 탐에 받아 토모미원 슈퍼스
So Lama Tsongkhapa says with respect to that, there is no final point of satisfaction, no matter how much of its happiness you enjoy. And you have been in it since beginningless time. It has been occurring since time without beginning.
다 디스고 단 된다 다 디마 송디 베 시우 슈진 송도 아스라 담불 실레 루 토발 이데모로와니 양다양도 루 토바 수수 세레방부 슈 제오게다 딘 통고 메와이냐 잠불인데는 소차 가주스키도 아니 기츠 참을로 아니 탈 아니 루 토니 시로야지 모도베 네딩인지 로 땡도 닝이지 치에메바딩 안주 야지야다 말랍투고도 진짜 아니 룰라 이든 스키어 말이스.
Here, Jarinpoche Lamatsun Kapa explains it in a very clear way. So the first point the first has 4 points. First one, it is inappropriate to rely on the body you have attained. You will discard your body again and again. So this is very clear. When we look not only at ourselves, but when you look at any life form, any living being on this planet, you can see that once that living being has taken birth, has taken a body, they will get to the final point in which the body will be discarded. And when you look at all living beings or life forms around you, you can not find even a single one that is free of having to discard their body at the end, which then demonstrates how there is no stability.
다드네 펜노 제발에 이데 모로완스 디 nganzule pendo shu de tol som test down to na ranganzu nujeris daris laund the shu magawa chede ch ro tong din chi long lang de so ch chigoras ro di kanji zu suzu devalia suzu de gilia nu never di yasha jaros ta ni res lavjin shu chachi yang shu chaji di ton di toni bigi da ji 착당 그 레마무 슈 냄비마무 슈 잡대 진리 용거 뜻술라 걔랑 녀인스네 이된 요샤바지다 드라이스는 베텐 드라이 쳐대와 요마다스 이된 요마레스 페나라고 페나 파 부규로레 마 초만 규로레 자 녀규로레 녀 드라규로레 소바 진리 짱짱레스 진짜 녀된 녀버서 이 요마레스.
And the second point says it is inappropriate to rely on benefit and harm done to you. There is no certainty as with respect to them. In that, when we consider our attitude with respect to benefit and harm, enemies and friends, so we hold a harm doer, someone that is harming us, as being one of our enemies in that sense. We develop a sense of dislike to that person. We have animosity towards that person. And holding on to the sense of animosity, anger, and so forth is undermining our happiness and well-being. And also with attachment, sometimes we get so attached to others. And that greater sense of attachment contributes to other forms of attachment and animosity, or attachment and hostility. And we hold those types of relations, either with friends or enemies, to be so stable, to be so firm. And yet what Lama Tsongkhapa points out in his text is that there is no certainty as to whether your father will become your son, your mother, your wife, an enemy, someone very dear to you, and the like. In that through transitioning from one lifetime to the next, there is no certainty with respect to friends and enemies, as your father could become your son, your mother, your wife, and an enemy, someone very dear to you.
대대도 파 분규를 맞춤은 규도 세디 개와 지원디게 라고 말도 세 델레 딘지 제로 라고 말도스라 비 코너 대회나.
So when it says here that your father will become your son, your mother, your wife, it refers to what happens in samsara when you go from one lifetime to another, right? So those relationships change over lifetimes rather than changing in one lifetime. Otherwise, if you take it to mean like in this very life, then that will indeed be quite outrageous for your father to become your son and your mother to become your wife.
간지 도다 갈수 것을 걔랑게 자이언스 라우치는 쇼지 마가 체대다 니인섬 쇼지 차대다 마시스 걔랑 샘드 베길이야 렘부로 지금 톨 데다 걔랑 파페 부용 그래스 디체바이나 차바슈 체다나 걔랑 마데바 용 그래 다마슈 체다나 걔랑 마데바 용 그래스 도도 소수기 시델라야 규식 차 그래스 셴발라야키 팽마르 차바슈 체다니 아니 콘드슈 체다니 아니 콘드 사사들니 슈지 겐네샤스 케요마르 간지 도도디 소수 셈이야. 또 사막이 소수 셈이야. 뇌야지. 레스.
So then thinking about it, we want to develop a mind that is balanced, that is not affected greatly by anger or attachment, a mind that is more relaxed, a mind that is more calm. So this is really, this is a state of mind that we want to develop. So if we have a mind which is not balanced, a mind that is susceptible to anger, attachment, and so forth, then we either develop attachment with respect to those who help us, or animosity with respect to those who harm us. And those states of mind are not helpful to others. If we develop, for example, an excessive form of attachment to others, it is not helpful to them. It is also not helpful to them if we develop a sense of hatred or animosity towards them. And also, it doesn't help us. It undermines, it harms our own mind.
더드네 평소 토벌라 이dem으로 와니 토산이 마살롱 왔다고.
And the text continues in saying, it is inappropriate to rely on the excellences you have achieved.
제다도 다가나로 와서 안주단 통대 잠블리 나노라야지 톱 코사 아니 전부 여댕이 롱주 시우 여댕이 딘디 말홍 저 ngosum tanga thongora sara chi ne je da page min lab ko ma da din di mangbu yora sara ngar ne thaba tu ta chi ani gyabu gyarkhan re senge zambli nanglo la ya khambat zigbu shiu din di seje yu khand da ti zu khanda samalo sal sa sa da sara yo mares din za an du zu thodan kanga da 아니 시사위지라 라그레지레 마도 가야문도스 또 사말로 로자스 나노라야 두즈 조르지 인자 이네요 마레스.
It says it is inappropriate to rely on the excellences you have achieved. You fall from high places to low ones. So we might try to ascend our ranks in society or to accrue a great wealth, but we can see directly that even those who have ascended to those high ranks in society, who have amassed great wealth, at some point fall from their position. We can see that directly in examples from history. We can see examples in history of great kings, of great courts, and so forth, that all have fallen down to the point in which, after some time, there is not much, if at all, that remains of them. And also, when we consider, at least personally, our life, at the end, after, even if we live to be 100, even if we live 100 years, that would also come to an end.
데르다 제 인자 또 이데 메바디 로 이데 메바디 두즈돌이야 성 14부 스탄 로 수수샘의 마치 반디와나 야제다 리아 삼삼더지 더 용사라서라.
So then if we think about it, if we think about how this state is not reliable, it is not stable, we cannot rely upon it. If we think about it and we line up in our mind all these arguments, and Geshe feels that we can get certainty in those arguments. We can come to the point at which we will think that, yeah, this is the nature of things. This is how it is.
디마도 간주 다지 품조 토발이야. 라 롱조 푸숨 소보 토바. 아니 코스 통불에 레바. 그졸에 베준 치바이나 랑신기 셈바 마로와치. 리더스 수수 코사레 정디 코사디 토비야기 체도 아니 셴라의 경당야. 코사 여버디 쇼리야 토니 아니 양 비 셴라야 차도 치고야 렌섬 치고야 아니 마로와 치고야 라 아니 तदुजी यूं दस कांजी दी 냠도 아니 샘 마롱이 샘 짱짱 소로지 로 짱짱 소로지 레기도 다 딜량원디 마기와 차용 그래 시대매와 차용 야자다 말이스
We might seek excellent resources, excellent enjoyments in samsara. We might seek high ranks, high levels in society. And yet, if we focus only on that, that would be if we endeavor only to attain those things, then we can see how we end up behaving in a way that is inappropriate with respect to ourselves and inappropriate with respect to others. To gain a higher rank in society, we might do it through criticizing others, through pointing out the faults of others, through developing a sense of jealousy and competitiveness with others. And all of those states are inappropriate. And the things that we do on that account, on account of those states, are also inappropriate things, which means that exclusively you could say that the mind behaves in the situation in a way which is completely inappropriate. And through that, we can see that there is no happiness, there is no sense of peace or relaxation that a mind gets, even if we attain those states.
레다 족발라야 족라야 족발라야 된거 족라야 된거 지금 이따 처음에 본 로스 다들이 간줄 배운 거라서
Also, the fourth point that Jerimpoche Lama Tsongkhapa makes is it is inappropriate to rely on companions. Here we can actually come up with quite a few examples of how it is inappropriate to think that companionship is reliable.
어딘지다 간줄 이익대사들이야 총이 인거라서 이익대 고사질이야 야자 야탐바 이익대 지투바이나 아니 로 박페부 용야지 아니 남주엔 패야지 지요르다 디 군주스음 코나렌다다 군주스음 코나 야로 야자 야탐바 때투바이나 야자 야탐바 캡상 용야지 다 이익대 메비게 아니 초 분sol로 소발이야 아니 로 야자 야탐바 때바이나 아니 산인 타마들이야 수수 동화 용야지 마기바 용야지 용야도 야지야다 말이스
It says in this section, it is inappropriate to rely on companions. You have to go on without them in the end. So Lama Tsongkhapa in this section points out the things which we cannot rely upon. So you might wonder, what then can I rely upon at the end? What we can rely upon are the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. These are reliable sources of refuge. And if we rely upon them, then we can attain happiness and well-being. Whereas if we attend the mind, if we rely on things which actually cannot be relied upon, companions, friends, and so forth, at the end, through relying upon them, we will experience suffering or unhappiness.
다 순번 인생 조와디 깨워주면 다 뭔가버티 대단한 삼보세 다디 땅간주 애니 가서 다 존나 땡데양라 중인세디 토네 삼로지 땅토반다 타투나 땡디지레스 디 마시와나다 애니 시게로야티 모두 지 비글야 따도 돼야지 매바디 대자시자다 말이었어.
And then Jerimpoche says, the third one is that you are reborn again and again. There seems to be no end to the continuity of births, reflect in this manner again and again. So if we can think about it, about the 12 links of dependent arising in relation to this section, we will understand Lama Tsongkhapa's point. Otherwise, what he's saying here is that we endlessly continue in the cycle of birth and death and birth and death and birth and death and on and on and on. So reflect in this manner again and again.
다들 디 바르도 참말로 타투온디 아니 차비님 볼이야. 그럼 차파세 로디 이데 메시지래야. 아니 이때 되게 여바디 디 토니 라 디토니다 라트고요레스.
So all of this section is acting as an antidote to attachment. In recognizing the unreliability of the points that Lamrim Kappa made here in that kind of friends and so forth are not to be relied upon, we enact the antidote to attachment.
가디바디 디 올아야 젠야 차바 기본 규비 다디 초 데바 파모치니스 대자마스를 나와라 대자마스 젠야 차바 기본 규비 다디 초 데바 페모치니 동을 칠주발라 데빌로 기와 인지 동을 싸발라 무디비 오니기 데바 메데스 페나 드로와 차베 동하와나 드로 차베 동하와나 데비 Devi lonjwa. Tenghami dongar chi rim gabitsi deva rim gikiwa. Hawa yingi. Wongi deva namayinde laya detana marda donga gibicheros.
Furthermore, Lama Tsongkhapa says not only what he said before, but on top of that, most of the present happy feelings that increase our attachment are happy mental states that arise with respect to a relief of suffering. There is no intrinsic happiness that is unrelated to the elimination of suffering. For instance, Lama Tsongkhapa says, if you suffer because you have walked too much, a happy mind arises due to sitting down. Happiness appears to arise gradually, while the great previous suffering gradually ceases. However, he says, this is not intrinsic happiness, for if you sit too much, again, they will produce suffering as before.
Ngoni devi gyu imbaynas. Dongar gi gyu chetar temba tsamgi. Dongar chembal dundrova shendu. Drondu nyawa dan sadon dan nima dan trimala soba. Kyang chetsam rindu temba tetsam dewa chembal dundrogoba la. Rinjana dungan bashi kiwan hango. Hangos.
As Lama Tsongkhapa emphasizes, it is not intrinsic happiness, for if you sit too much, again, that will produce suffering as before, just as suffering increases to the same extent as you are subject to the causes of suffering. So too should walking, sitting, lying, eating and drinking, sun and shade, and the like increase your happiness to the same extent that you indulge in them, if those were causes of intrinsic happiness. However, it appears that if these are extended long term, only more suffering is produced.
Tadere 대다짱스 계란 이 마치바이나 송거다 대다짱 아니 상기기 nganjugin do namolaya sonyorez 아니 야gar기 löbenchimbo 아니 파발라리 반덴타와 트라발로 소비아 sonyorez kendisi sigdasra o disngorda.
Now, if you don't believe all the things that Lama Tsongkhapa have said before, there are some more sources that you can check. Like, for example, these points are also set forth in the Descending into the Womb Sutra, the root text of the 400 stanzas and its commentary. So here, Rinpoche Lama Tsongkhapa says, you can also check the writings of the great Indian masters, such as Aryadeva or Chandakirti.
That dipardo lola matebadro chikra lola matebadro ke chonsones gandro ke tonsones ro ten tombaina nganzo ya didol drolin chebana ani semleya niwa tembu niya keba jingura.
So far we've covered the presentation of suffering. Today we looked at the consideration of the 6 steps of suffering. Geshe is wondering if you find that some of those points did not make sense to you, that they have some contradictions or problems in this presentation. If you have any such thing that doesn't make sense to you, that you find contradictory, Geshe says, please bring it on. The point is that we discuss it, we think about it to the point in which we develop certainty in this presentation. So have you got any qualms, issues?
제가 짓다는 일단 얘네 야우총갑이 송 되게 가주스 제샤와이나로 아니 대버체를 지로 대버체 당에 댄서 삼거다 이 가드이나 아니 제르무 지 손장장 로투바나 디 검시로지 나라지 아니 자야지 면도 삼삼도 나 딘디 수준의 이 건조 방주 삼단의 지기였어 근데 저는 저 위려야지 나는 대버체다 디 삼삼을 괜찮지 많던 딘디 딘디 용식이라서 and gandu manton din yon sigra da di tole chi yobana an zu droning chebana yaji yadamba and pengris dimena jaran zu chewa shemba din yon and chewa tan rochis
Geshe is asking that because when you read through Lama Tsongkhapa's writing, through his teachings, his sense of faith in Lama Tsongkhapa is growing stronger and stronger. So Geshe always constantly is reading through Lama Tsongkhapa's explanation, and in some sense, you can say that his mind is habituated with this presentation given by Lama Tsongkhapa, and of course, faith also arises from that. But also through doing that, there is also a danger, or there is also a possibility of not being able to see things which do not make sense, or things which are actually contradictory. So it happens that when you look at someone's writing and you have great faith, that you can't see the contradictions or things that do not make sense in the presentation. So Geshe is asking you guys if you can point out things that do not make sense, or things which are seemingly contradictory. Gaza? But anyway, let's do it. All right, so it's not a contradictory. It's not a contradiction. Sorry, it's just a kind of a general question. So you might say, so you said that you could take two people that have that lived the life in a kind way, in a good way. So one of them was one of them is a Dhamma practitioner. Another person is not a Dhamma practitioner, but still they live the life kind of in a way that they try to be good-hearted, try to be a kind person. Then thinking of what occurs being on the verge of death, why is it that we say that one person is in a better position, like has an advantage? I guess that you're saying that why do we say that the Dhamma practitioner has a greater advantage being on the verge of death in terms of how it affects the next life? After all, our future lifetimes are affected by incomplete karma that we still have that continues with us from this lifetime to future lives. That's the question, right? Yeah. So both of them might fear might arise in them closer to the time of death, but still both might be able to reflect upon the way that they lived their life and thinking that I haven't harmed others to a great degree, I lived a good life. So you could say that their state of mind being on the verge of death is quite similar, and yet some might say that some like a Buddhist would have a greater advantage. So why is it so? Dila Quran, dila ganda te chie mesa, ene chitan chena tongpa chi yosa. Tadi mi ni shisha ne tewa inarwa. Niga mi se detan di samba sambo to ne detach bares. Chik number imbala chik number minds. Then the nigga shira lamola kuranzo chiwa di la tanyero nero join na peshe namta chi kegires. Nigga ki so mitse detan ketan di tola samlutan waina ni so mitse hotabata yawo jet of chains milan nova mache pendo che semba sambo che then the double chi imbala ngatsu nangyun tadi namba sange ba ina je pento cha de chi yosares sena pento cha se di chi potan di peshe yaga de chagires di gimsen karinas kesi samno tantan double chi imbala ni niga sem sambo chita cheva imbala di chegi keva di 가르치는 샤기레스 나서 케와 디네 케와 치말라토 와이나 나서 렌 소소 렌냠도 파드로이로 왔어 케와 가르토네 샤기레스
지금 뭐 짠짠 제대 걸었어.
어
쇼가는 라트로 샘디
음,
지금 플로우 존치
어.
샘드 샘 가는 도자가라. 기어지마라 샘드 드로고라.
Well, it's probably one of them was a good painter, a good tanka painter doing deity paintings and so forth. So, it's like they go from this lifetime to the next with a mind, with a good state of mind.
세븐세드. 알든지 도지. 당한주 계란기 레그 토는 드레 찍버리스. 안 찍야가다 찍두가 가르차르스. 타르투네 텔레파우스. 이제 레싱이디 상로 땅땅 자와 제당 그 토니 레사고를 모두 셴바 딜 마드비기 레세지 모두. 진짜 상로 디 규림부 아니 센데자 마임바 केवल छिमा पेंजल या मिंगनी सामलो ताउंदी दी ले दी शुग छेरंडो या केवल छिमा ले इंबाई ना दी ट्युंजी मंबा योवाची त नामी दिस गोरस त केवल छिमा तोले या सामलो चिया मादा ना से दी चिबोले या याबु चिवसन याबु रेस इने दी निशु दी केवल छिमा ले रोदाम मंदवास
저랑 계속 소소남바 인 삼로타나양 소디 겨와 디제디 소드는 제와이나 데펜도
되네 넘버 1 넘버 최고 말았어
yeah. Well, Gary, kind of that was of course only joking, but no, when you think of the scenario that you presented, you can say that from the point of view of what those people did, the karma, you could say, it's the same karma, but really when you think of the presentation of karma more deeply, the major factor that influences our karma is the motivation, the way that we think of the actions that we take. So if one's motivation is more long-term, which means not limited just to this life, but the more kind of the way of thinking, the motivation is going beyond this life. How can I affect future lifetimes? And beyond that, the weight of the action becomes much greater. So the difference would be Geshe feels that if someone has lived the life, in taking care of their actions, their activities, being kind-hearted, or trying to abstain from harming others and so forth, but the motivation was not limited to this lifetime. In thinking that through this way of acting, I want to affect my future lifetimes and beyond, the actions which are motivated by this form of motivation become more powerful. So someone could regard himself as Buddhist, and yet in the way of behaving, still the focus might be, rather than future lifetimes, the focus might be on this lifetime only. So someone might regard himself as Buddhist, but if the way of behaving is mainly orientated towards this life, at least in terms of the motivation, the way of thinking with respect to the actions that they take, are they really being like fully fledged Buddhist practitioner? Probably not.
re bena tse dilaya kibu yongya debu yongya chi nigi samdang gores imba ina ya da chi namba ma imba digi tse dit re ma to kewa chimi tola ya samlo ta yomaro ta namba digi tse dilaya kibu debu yongya di chigiyor di yongya di kewa chimi che du chawa diya wachi chub tuyagi ani luden debu yongya samdang ya la soba me shambala ya kewa gyuni me shambala kasa sokcha shambala ya pendo chiya chidu susu lu debu yongya samlo tanya la soba an di toni pegi ta domba sonya la soba di semla ya ani nipa tama sunda mikse wachi chego sares tinza kewa chima la dronge di lu dumare sem de ani sem du drongi ani nishuk chengi sem di kewa chima leondi jebu yaga mbata di mena the dindi songo res ro nambe.
So Buddhists explain it in the following way. They say that when you live your life in looking at the actions that you take and your way of thinking about them, the motivation goes beyond the affairs of this life. You think that, for example, I'm behaving in a positive way in this life. I'm keeping my body and mind well in this life. I'm maintaining physical well-being or mental well-being, so that on that basis, I also be able then through a succession of future lifetimes to also gain better and better states. This type of motivation, this type of way of thinking is making your actions become more powerful. If you think that, for example, I should abstain from harming others, I should protect the life of others, I should abstain from harming them, I should behave well, because it will contribute to my well-being in this life, and also on that basis, it will also contribute to my happiness and well-being in future lifetimes. The thing that goes with us from this lifetime to the next is not our body, but our mind. So if you allow that motivation that extends not only to this life, but future lifetimes, if you let that motivation affect your mind, then the mind that continues from this lifetime to the next will have more power, more efficacy. So this is at least how Buddhists explain it.
No understand no.
So what do you reckon? Does it sit well with you? Might not have. Hmm. Okay. So you said that you're happy with the answer, but just kind of to tell a kind of brief story in order to illustrate the point that you were um, connecting with the story. Kind of there was way back at Kopan, there was kind of a young monk that had those special qualities, and someone credible had an observation and said that in the previous life, they were a really kind person, really good person. Yeah, not being aware of them being a Sangha member in the previous life, but just being a good person. Is that what you said? Um, so so you can have um, someone like that have created imprints in the previous lifetime, affecting their mind in this lifetime. Um, which means that I guess what you're saying is that it's not that necessarily they have cultivated that in a deliberate effort. It's more like this is a result of actions that they've done in previous lifetime. Whereas you can have someone that is regarding themselves as Buddhist and have been doing that for a long time, but they're not necessarily putting an effort into training the mind, becoming kind-hearted person. So then in that sense, there's no kind of, you say that while them being, you could say, have an advantage of just being Buddhist. That's the point that you're making, right? You're not really agreeing with me, you see. Okay, so what you're actually saying is that the accumulation of karma that you have had from before that you brought into this life seems to have more effect than just what you do in this life. 다 도도체나 그런 칼라 디 그런 좀더 남인다 시기로 다디 도도체나 칼라 그래서나 다 다디 소소 미츠디라 센삼보체야 디 야오체야 디안 케와 나말라테네 레 카레사와디 파차 카레샤와디 케와 녜말라 디 야오치 sombaina 아니 케와디라 야오차에 기라고 침보요레스 디멘 다 세디라 세디 호타바드 체와이나 믹세기 체와이나 덴데 케와 나마라 레사 디 사실 된다고 지차게 말했어 캐치에슈디 케와 나마라 덴데 레 사마사 디라 케바치 샤고게 데스 그런 삼기도사
디 하마스다스 디다
그런데 좀 데카라선 다디 니마 덴데 니치 투 손스 그런 덴데 치 신신이나 라인에 센삼보레스 믹세치레스 아니 미치 덴데 치 zigbe tonne kuran de lesson bo shochi gyores kuran di chaba chebares ne layo mares ne kewa ngamala mi semba sambores ne de
디나야 nganzugi sarki singi bi kelen koras sarki sarki kelen di tsambala kenj da tuwar le ngami le tuwar de ya sen dilaya sab drum tu ya yi tam tu ya tindi marwas di yoras di yobanza da di zu suzugi da rogbala ya rali ani chi suzugi zendula ya rali ani kyawang hami lela ya tu mambu zongo das ra ade kyawang hami le chi ko yoba samida yeme da kyabadan rogyas yumares tinda yumares ra ne samdin yumares
sarkesena sarba keba. Well, we still assert that there are things which are newly generated. Newly generated in that even if in previous lifetime you haven't made a deliberate effort to do a particular thing, you can still do it in this life. In that sense, they're newly generated. But still, when we think of the qualities that we develop, they depend actually upon many factors. It's hard to kind of narrow them down into one thing. So they depend upon the friends that we have. They depend upon the effort that we make. They depend upon karma that we have accumulated in the past. They depend upon a multitude of conditions rather than being able to narrow them down to one thing, whether you have done it before or not and so forth. They depend upon many things, and still you can still say that there are things that you can newly generate in your life if you make effort in doing it.
thank you
Thank you. It seems that we ran out of time, so we finish it here for now. We have one more session before Christmas, so next Friday, 24th. teaching is as usual. So thank you very much. We'll finish off with the final Lamrim dedication. Just find where the text is here. For my two collections, vast space that I've amassed from working with great effort at this practice for a great length of time, may I become the chief leading Buddha for all those whose minds' wisdom eyes blinded by ignorance. Even if I do not reach this state, may I be beheld in your loving compassion for all lives Manjushri. And may I find the best of completed, graded parts of the teachings, and may I please all the Buddhas by my practice, using skillful means, drawn by the force of compassion. May I clear the darkness from the minds of all beings, with the points of the path as I've discerned them. May I uphold Buddha's teachings for a very long time. With my heart going out with great compassion, in whatever direction the most precious teachings have not yet spread, or once spread have declined, may I reveal this treasure of happiness and aid. May the minds of those who wish for liberation be granted bounteous peace, and the Buddha's deeds be nourished for a long time by even this graded paths to enlightenment, completed due to the wondrous virtuous conduct of the Buddhas and their sons. May all humans and non-human beings who eliminate adversity and create conducive conditions for practicing the excellent paths never be parted in any of their lives from the purest path praised by the Buddhas. Whenever someone makes effort to act in accordance with the tenfold Mahayana virtues practices, may always be assisted by the mighty ones, and may ocean of prosperity spread everywhere.